On the last day of the Festival of Tabernacles, God woke me up with the words, "the last and greatest day." And I know that that's from Scripture. And what he was doing was reminding me of something that Jesus spoke about on the last and greatest day of the Festival of Tabernacles. And this comes from John 7, verse 37. On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Up to that time, the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. On hearing his words, some of the people said, "Surely this man is a prophet." Others said, "He is the Messiah." Still others asked, "How can the Messiah come from Galilee? Does not the Scripture say that the Messiah will come from David's descendants and from Bethlehem, the town where David lived?" Thus the people were divided because of Jesus. Some wanted to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him. So during the Festival of Tabernacles, I would normally expect that God would be talking with me about dwellings or about temporary shelters, etc. And he has talked with me about that in the past. And he has a bit, actually, in this year as well, in some situations that we're dealing with as a family. But as you know, if you've been listening to my more recent videos, particularly the recent video in which I talked about witnessing the covenant, I shared with you that my water was turned off and that God is doing this thing that, I tell you guys all the time, if you want to see biblical miracles, you have to have biblical faith. And in fact, if you want to be saved, you have to have biblical faith. This is what God requires. I would not have known that this is what he requires if he hadn't brought me where he's brought me in so many different situations. But this is what he requires. I'm here to testify that to you and to live it out in front of you, as I've been doing for the last 3.5 years, and will continue to do so for a little less than 2 months before the Antichrist rises. My water was shut off, and God has been providing water. He's been providing water through my pipes. No other way for me to report that to you, okay? And he has provided it according to my faith, so that when I have tried to collect water, he handed me over to the work of my own hands to see what that would do for me. And so it's really actually astounding that I would collect water, have a bucket of water, and still not have enough water to do my dishes. But when I trust God to provide the water, and I'm not trying to have a backup plan for him, including, by the way, as I mentioned in the video, I've been a camper a lot of my life, and I know that I can go and get like a 7-gallon jug of water, and I can use that for drinking, I can use it for cleaning, I can use it for whatever I need water for. But God has very clearly let me know that I am to trust him, and that if I do that, then I'm conceding that he is not able to water my plants even without rain. As he says in 2 Kings 3, he can fill up the pools without rain. This is an easy thing for the Lord. So he's required me to submit to him and rely on him with full, unwavering trust, full, unwavering faith. And he has told me things like, "I know what you need, I'm capable of giving you what you need, and that's all you need to take." So that when he's giving me the water to be able to wash my dishes, to be able to wash myself, and then at the end of what I need, the water goes back down to a trickle, I'm not allowed to become afraid and think, "Oh no, but see, the water isn't continuing to be there. If I don't need it anymore, I don't need it anymore." And this is what he's been teaching me. We're not used to that. We're used to the world providing in excess of what we need. We're not used to relying on him. We're not used to worrying about whether there's a drought or not, because the water comes through, right? The city provides it, and we pay for it. But these aren't the things that God established. And what he's done with me reminds me a lot of what he did with regard to the manna. You're not to take more than what you need. On the 6th day of the week, you are to take double in order to provide for the Sabbath so that you're not working on the Sabbath. But that's it. If you take more than what you need, aka if you are storing buckets of water, he's going to foil it. And so the way that he foiled it was to not provide me any more water. No, you stored it. You got this, right? And so it's just been so faith building. It's been very difficult. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's been very difficult, but as he's been teaching me how to rely on him. But it is astounding to me, and I am in awe of his sovereignty. I'm in awe of his mercy, his provision, his constant investment in me, to teach me that by not hoarding or storing up or having a backup plan for him, that he's actually provided what I need in order to wash my dishes and wash myself and drink water and everything else. Everything that I've needed, he's provided, as long as I haven't tried to go to the work of my own hands. And I'll tell you consistently, when I've tried to go to the work of my own hands, he has foiled it. So there's been this dance with us, and he's been doing it during the Festival of Tabernacles. He started it prior to, but he's continued this lesson through the Festival of Tabernacles, and I just think that that is particularly interesting, given that Jesus declared himself to be living water on the final day of the Festival of Tabernacles. There's something that he's teaching me. Now, before I continue on to what he's teaching me, I want to draw your attention to this, because if you're not paying attention and making connections between your circumstances, your feelings, your experiences, your memories, your dreams, etc., the ways that God is speaking, you're going to miss the way that God is speaking. So many times people come to me and tell me they're not hearing from God, they don't hear from God the way that I do. And here's what I want to remind you of, is that Elihu in Job 33 tells Job that, you're saying that God does not speak, but God speaks. He's speaking in many different ways. And he starts to list off the ways, and he includes our afflictions. God sends these things. Why does Elihu know that? Because God said that. Because God said, I separate the light from the darkness. I send prosperity and disaster. I do all these things. And so if we believe that, then we're going to pay attention to the things he's sending. We're going to pay attention to the things he's speaking. We're going to start attuning ourselves, and then we're going to start understanding what it is that he's doing, what it is he's moving us to understand, to be built, to correct and change in our lives. All I'm sharing with you is what it is that I have paid attention to that God has been speaking, how I have a relationship with him. I'm witnessing the covenant to you. Does that mean that I have a different covenant? No, it doesn't. It means we all have the same covenant, and at this time in history, there's been so much deception within the counterfeit Christianity that was originally planted in the harlot Catholic Church and continues in the prostitutes that bore out of her, that none of us seem to understand what our covenant is. We don't seem to understand how we're supposed to be relating with God and responding to him. We've been thinking that we're waiting to be picked up. But God has raised witnesses at this time who are going to die in less than 2 months when the Antichrist rises. And what those witnesses have been doing for the last 3.5 years is witnessing the covenant to you so that you can know that this is real and what you're supposed to be doing. The first thing that God was directing my attention to has to do with this concept of thirsting. And when you think about this metaphor, this thing that God has established in order to use it as a metaphor for us to understand spiritual longing is that thirst or hunger, which he uses in order to help us to understand the satiation that we're going to feel in our souls from him. If you think about that thirst, there's a constant longing and a want in our souls. He says in John 4 that those who drink living water will never thirst again when he's speaking with the Samaritan woman at the well. And so he's brought these things up for me because originally when the water was shut off and it was either bone dry or there was like a little drip, drip, drip coming from the faucet, I felt scared. I felt scared that I wasn't going to be able to provide water for myself to drink or my dogs to drink, that I'd never be able to have my grandchildren or my children here again. And there was an anxiety, and he talks about that anxiety. Like he talks about how people are going to be rationing water and food, and they're going to eat and drink in anxiety. Why does he say that? There's no other way that I would experience, that I would really get the depth of this message that he speaks in Scripture if he wasn't putting me in this situation. It's not to bring grief on me unnecessarily. We know that Lamentations 3:33 says he doesn't bring grief willingly, but he does bring it in order for us to be built and in order for us to be disciplined. And so I understand this because of the situation that he's put me in, but I also understand his provision because of the situation that he's put me in. And there was a time when people were relying on those rains. We don't rely on that anymore, do we? We rely on the world. It kind of reminds me of Jeremiah 42, where God is, the people are consulting with Jeremiah, and they say, ask the Lord what we're supposed to do, because Nebuchadnezzar had already captured essentially Jerusalem, but there were some people who were left. And they said, we'll do whatever the Lord says. So Jeremiah comes back and he says, this is what the Lord has said. He said that those of you who are left, he's relented concerning the disaster he's brought on you. Those of you who are left are to stay in the land. You must stay in the land. But if you're determined to go to Egypt, he's going to chase you down with sword, famine, and plague. And the people didn't listen. They asked for the word of the Lord, but they didn't listen. This whole situation is vaguely familiar. In fact, not really so vaguely. It's blatantly familiar. Because God has told me repeatedly to stay in this land, even with a notice to vacate that is enforceable by court. It's enforceable by the sheriff. And yet I've been in this land. God told me to stay here, and he made a way for me to stay here. It's a bizarre thing in a way to what, for what he's doing, but it's biblical. So I just continue to listen to what he tells me to do, because he is working something out here. And it's not just for me. I'm being used as an offering and a sign for you. Here's another reason why I want to tell you why this is so important. Because you're going to be living during the Antichrist reign. You're going to be living during a time where you're going to need biblical provision. And in order to get that biblical provision, you're going to have biblical faith. Do you understand why it is that this is being lived out before you? You are going to need to have biblical faith in order to receive biblical provision, or you won't receive it at all. Remember that Jesus couldn't perform miracles in the towns where there was no faith. That's not on Jesus. That was because God isn't wasting his glory on people who aren't going to believe in him anyway, and who aren't going to go the full way. So what has God told me to do? He's told me to stay in the land, and he made a way. But he also made me stay here the full time. When I was told you are only allowed to stay in that house until the 28th, or until the 27th. That is the latest that you can stay there. And I stayed until the 28th because God was telling my kids and confronting me about making my faith, pushing my faith until the very end. And I have not been driven from this land. Then, despite the fact that he gave me the land, he then had the water shut off so that he could teach me what? That he is able to provide. Now, what he said in Jeremiah 42 is that he will chase them down with sword, famine, and plague. And he says, if you're determined to go to Egypt. Now, If this is so easy for God to just give you land, for him to just give you these promises, and you don't have to have faith and you don't have to believe in him in order to receive them, then why is it that he always had to tell the people, stay in the land I've given you? Why were they so determined to go to Egypt? Because they had to live in faith and obedience. Remember what God said. If you obey me, here are the things I'm going to do for you. But if you disobey me, these are the things I'm going to do to you. And that includes not providing. That's part of what he's teaching me. And so what he said in Jeremiah 42, if you're determined to go to Egypt because you say, well, there my bread will be provided and I won't see war, the implication is there was something that they were suffering in order for their bread to be provided, right? Because the relationship that God established with his people was that if you obey me, I'm going to send the rains for your crops. I'm going to make them grow. But if you don't, I'll send pests. I'll send plague. I won't send rain. I'll withhold the rain. It was difficult to live in the covenant in obedience to God. Guess what? It hasn't changed. There wasn't a separate list of expectations for Jews as there are for Gentile Christians. God's heart has not changed. And in fact, so many of you believe that the burden was greater before. The burden is greater on you now. When Jesus came and he was talking about the fulfillment of the covenant, the fulfillment of the law, he was saying things like, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. You've heard it said that you shall not murder. And yet he said, if you're harboring anger towards a brother or sister, you're committing murder in your heart. And yet he said, I'm telling you to turn the other cheek. Pray for your enemies. If someone tries to sue you, give them your cloak too. Give to those who ask of you. Bless those who curse you. Listen, I find it a lot easier to give someone what they just gave me. An eye for an eye. It's a lot easier to do that than to hone love and graciousness in your heart for someone who has been terrible to you. The burden didn't get lighter. If you believe that, it's because you haven't been reading the word. So these are things that God has been teaching me. To stay in the land. How difficult it is to stay in the land. How difficult it is to truly trust him and not rely on Egypt, not rely on the world to provide these things for you. You're going to go through it. You are going to experience these things. The Antichrist, specifically the false prophet, is going to cause you to not be able to buy or sell if you don't have the mark of the beast. How else are you going to make it? How are you going to provide water to your children, your grandchildren, your animals, yourself? How are you going to do that when the Antichrist is preventing you from being able to do that unless you worship the beast or the image of the beast? This is part of what God has been teaching me and working out through me as an offering to you. And so before I go into living water, there's something else that he's been really pressing on me more recently, is this return to Eden. That when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they had been provided for by God. Just obey me, obey my rule that you don't eat from that one tree. Oh, but we want to find out about that one tree. Why? Why the forbidden fruit? You know, I do have equity in my home and I have equity in the building. And I could try to cash in on those, but I have 2 months to live. And I've asked God, do you want me to go and get this money or figure out how to get this money for my children? Do you think that he has me living this way, but he's not going to require my children to live this way? No. My children understand that. This isn't a matter of me being lazy or something, like I don't want to go get the money. The issue is the same thing as collecting the water. Do you want to return to what you used to do, which is to work by the work of your own hands and by that money and by the world standards, or do you want to continue to trust in what I will provide to you based on faith? And this is what I choose. And so this metaphor of being back in this Garden of Eden, where I'm satisfied and where I'm trusting in the promises of God and the provision of God and what He wants to give me, okay? Because there's a part of me that is more of a flesh part of me that wants to turn on the faucet and just have an endless amount of water so that I don't have to trust that He's going to provide it when I need it again. I just know that it's going to be there. There's a part of me that wants that. And that part of me comes from the flesh. The part of me that is living in the Spirit knows that God will provide what I need, that He has promised to provide what I need, and that I need to believe that, and I need to stand in it. That part of me knows that I don't know what I need. I don't know what's good for me. I'm not able to build me. I don't know what's required in order for me to be saved. God's the one who has to take me there, and so I have to fully submit to where He's taking me. And I don't want that money. And I know my kids don't either. My kids are not upset that I'm not going to try to collect the money. So here's the thing. I could go and get that 7-gallon jug of water, and I could just go get that every week, and I could, take care of my things that I need. And then I could run around and try to water every plant in my yard. Or I can trust that God's going to water the plants in my yard and that He's going to bring me. What do you think God wants me to do? How do you think He wants me to spend my time? Because I fear God, and I know that you can plant the seed, you can water the seed, but only God will make it grow. And then I could go through all of that stupid busy work that He has already worked out of me in my life, living by my flesh and by the work of my own hands and by my own understanding. And He can foil all of it. Just like He says in Haggai 1, I put holes in your purses. You were toiling. You were doing all of this, and I put holes in your purses because you had no concern about my house. God says, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and these things will be added to you. And it's my testimony that they are. So I'm not going to incite His wrath. I'm not going to, by doing these things. Do you know my toilet is still flushing? Like, I don't have to fill my toilet. I know it's kind of maybe a random thing to bring up, but that's kind of a miracle, don't you think? When your water's been shut off, but your toilet's still flushing. He's not making me live in squalor and filth. He is providing what I need. And so, even if my plants are looking a little stressed, I have to keep trusting Him. He's requiring that. He will not allow me to go and water the plants unless I want to be responsible for all of them, because God is able to bring water out of a rock, fill the pools of the earth without rain. And it's funny that He says that because, who provides the rain? Is that not a miracle too? He's able to do all of these things. All right, so He's talked with me about that thirst, and that thirst that I felt all my life, that overwhelming, insatiable thirst that I felt, that I didn't even know what I needed in order to quench it. And so I tried to satiate myself with all kinds of idols my whole life until He finally brought water out of a rock. And out of the rock, as a matter of fact. And that was all I needed. Once I got a taste of that, once I tasted of the heavenly gift and was enlightened and understood what I had been searching for my whole life, there was no going back. That's living water. And if you drink from that living water and you prioritize that living water, you will never thirst again. In Jeremiah talks about people rejecting that living water in favor of false doctrines and fantasies. In Jeremiah 2:13, it says, my people have committed 2 sins. They've forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Do you see that in counterfeit Christianity? that the living water, the ministry that we're supposed to receive from Jesus, is not what people want. They've rejected it. To go and listen to these lying pastors who who shepherd them for themselves and to themselves. They don't care about the flock. Jeremiah 17:13, Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water. As I was reading these scriptures, I was reminded of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel is given, he's being brought through the third temple, and he's being shown this fresh water that flows into the salt water and makes the salt water clean so that all kinds of living creatures are able to live there. Now, God has established the Dead Sea for a reason. He's used it quite a bit in metaphor. The Dead Sea, nothing can live in the Dead Sea. It's salt water. You know how he says it'll be left for salt? Okay, so it's salt water, and no creatures live in there. Maybe some microorganisms or whatever, but nothing really of use to us. You can't go fishing there. And so he talks about that in Ezekiel. He says, swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. You need to ask yourself the question, is the river flowing there? Are you drinking that water? He also, by the way, says in Ezekiel 12:19, say to the people of the land, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is what the sovereign Lord says about those living in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. They will eat their food in anxiety and drink their water in despair, for their land will be stripped of everything in it because of the violence of all who live there. Okay, so this is what I was speaking of earlier, but I mentioned this Ezekiel passage of the water flowing into the salt water because it's also spoken of in Zechariah 14:8. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half of it to the Dead Sea and half of it west to the Mediterranean Sea in summer and in winter. This is the water that we need to want. We need not want. I don't want to return to the tree of knowledge of knowledge and good of good and evil. I do not want that. And what I feel is that curse that was placed on humanity, on Adam and Eve, or through Adam and Eve on humanity, for that disobedience, for not relying on God, for not just staying in what He has provided and believing in that, and believing in the abundance of what He's provided. I feel that curse being healed, and I feel God bringing me back to the Garden of Eden in a way, in a symbolism, because I've received calls and notices and things like that. You have a lot of money waiting, and I mean, to me, it's like, oh, you're so eager to give me all my money. Okay. Like this is legit. God told me from the very beginning not to trust man, so I'm not going to go back to that. What He's brought me out of is an incredible idolatry of man, of money, of this world, into, I don't want any of that. I don't want it. Even if it is true, even if it exists, even if it's easy for me to get, I don't want it. What I want is what God has brought me into. I want Him. I want being able to stand with Him and trust Him and know that He's the one who's providing for me, because then I don't have to live in that anxiety that I lived in before of scrambling and is there going to be enough, and all of this. I don't have to even wonder that. All I have to know is that whatever God has given me, He has deemed to be enough, and His grace is sufficient. I don't need any other fruit than what He has provided. And so finally in Revelation 7:17, He says, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. He also brought my attention to this language that He uses in the word regarding living water, that there's a flow of living water, not a trickle, not a bone dry faucet, None of that. It's a flow of living water. And he talks about this in a stream. He talks about it in a river. That it flows from within as we believe in Christ. And it gives us peace and satisfaction. So it's constant. It's not a trickle. It's not dry. It doesn't run out as long as we stay in the Spirit and in faith. And I want to tell you that as long as I have stayed in the Spirit and in faith, that's what he is physically representing in my faucets. And you know what? I get it. Like, if you're not in the Spirit, you are going to think this message is bananas crazy. But you go ask him if it's true. You don't have to take my word for it. Go ask him. Another thing that he led me to was, or that he actually spoke to me, was waters in abundance. And I know where that is. It's Psalm 73, where David is talking about the wicked, and he says, like, you know, I had almost slipped. I started to become envious of the wicked, and, you know, this and that. And then he talked about how they drink up waters in abundance. And so God has also used this metaphor for those who are drinking false doctrines. And I think that's important to mention to you all on the channel, because I know that a lot of you do that. You think that it's okay for you to not be discerning, for you to not, you think that discernment is the judgment that God said not to do, but you've been commanded to discern. And you've been commanded to test the Spirit and not believe that all are from God. And so you go and drink up waters in abundance, and it's not going to be to your credit. If you believe in any other gospel, you've believed in vain. What I'm speaking to you, what I'm living out for you in front of you as an offering in suffering, this is the truth. And you need to go and ask him, who is speaking the truth? I'm telling you right now that he has raised witnesses to speak the truth, because no one has been speaking the truth. So I know that those people you're subscribed to on your YouTube channels are not speaking the truth to you. I know it because I know the times and I know what I'm doing. The other thing that he brought my attention to is this metaphor of those who were thirsting as they were wandering in the wilderness, and how he tested them and they brought out water from a rock. And Jesus being the rock through whom he's bringing that water out. And I think of, as I mentioned, all the years that I spent thirsting and trying to satiate my thirst with things that couldn't. But when he brought that water out of the rock, he taught me to stay close and to drink and to be nourished. And it's never been the same. My life has never been the same. But you have to stay close to him. And see, when you have water that you're paying for, you turn on the faucet. I'm not telling you guys not to pay your water bill. That's not where we're going with this, okay? That's not how you should interpret it. But when you have something that's just a guarantee, you turn it on and off, you walk away. You don't even think about it, do you? You don't think about what that is and what it means. And when it's not coming from God directly through obedience and through trust, etc., you don't think about it. This was appealing to the Israelites to leave the land where they had to live that way and to go to a place where there was going to be a guarantee. And you're going to need to think about that. You're going to need to make some hard decisions about whether or not you really believe in God, quite frankly, and are you going to be able to trust him in this way. The last thing I want to share with you is that he talks about this as a free gift. It's a free gift. It's not something that the pastors get to covet, the counterfeit churches get to covet. This is the free gift of the water of life from God. It's not something that you're having to pay the city for. You know, like in the city I live in, we literally pay 4 times the amount of a city right next to us. And what can we even do about it? There's nothing that we can do about it. The times are wicked. The times are unjust. There's nothing that's going to change. And when the Israelites went astray and they rejected, when they rejected Samuel as their prophet, and they rejected God, and they were saying, well, we want human kings. This is what they were told, that they were going to be subject to these human kings, that they were going to oppress them and rule over them, and that they were going to learn. Because all of these things were provided for free. In abundance, Garden of Eden. All of these things were provided by God, provided that the people obey. That's all we need to do. And yet, I say that, and it's hard. It's hard for us to trust that he's going to provide these things. It's hard to see that the water runs out when we're done using it. Is it going to be there when we go back? It's hard to see that the rest of the world lives in a different way that seems so easy. But when you're being healed of the curse, you're being brought back into that. You are returning to that Garden of Eden. You're being given that choice. Are you going to rely on him? Are you going to live in all of that, with all of those trees, all of that fruit, and reject relying on the work of your own hands, relying on the so-called guarantees of this world that oppress you and rule over you harshly? Do you want to return to that? Even if there's an option, even if there's that option to go cash in on that money. I don't. That's not what I choose. God has proven himself. I don't want that anymore. Please discern this message with God.